Hey everybody, welcome to We've Got Ward, a Doof Media podcast series where we expertly dissect and discuss Ward, Wildbow's return to the world of parahumans. My name is Matt Freeman, and I want to talk today about the fine distinctions between breaker and changer designations and the ramifications of these differences in context of the standard PRT response.
Matt.
Yeah?
The podcast.
Oh, right, yeah.
We got to record. This is not the time for this right now.
Okay, later though?
No, Matt. Okay. No, write a paper. This is the weekly podcast where Matt and I eagerly dive into Wildbow's world of geeky refuges, anxiety explosions, and alien-based death powers as we analyze and interpret this ongoing web serial. This week, we're approaching the end of Arc 11 Blinding with chapters 11.10 and 11.11. Seems like we're heading towards the climax here, Matt. The remains of the brilliantly executed three-pronged Heartbreak Siders attack chase after a van that contains their friends. They're interrupted by Nailbiter and Colt, who seems to have a set of powers very reminiscent to a certain friend of ours. The two sides battle, and Victoria is victorious, but is forced to let the bad guys go, agreeing to a prisoner swap. Heading to the university, Victoria learns the most literal definition of some of your teammates. Matt, what do you think of these two chapters?
Well, first of all, I like that we get to cover these two together. It just seems like they go together really well.
I agree.
We kind of finished off the fight with Lord of Loss. We moved on to the meeting with Rachel and now, this team plus now Rachel and her dogs are heading off. And then in these chapters, we have basically one extended fight between Love Lost group and the new member of Love Lost group, who we're going to pretend to be cagey about, even though everyone knows. And basically just a lot of stuff going on here. Great battles, powers taken in new directions and allowing us to explore characters in new ways, which is always one of my favorite things. So basically just can't wait to get into it.
Yeah, me too. There's a lot of action here, a lot going on. For some reason, I really liked the first chapter. I enjoyed 10, but for some reason 11 felt really dense to me. I don't know, we don't ever do a word count. It just felt like a lot happened in that chapter. I remember reading it on Sunday afternoon, and just it just keeps it's just more and more, and you think it's about to be over. Nope, we got more, and it's just very dense. There's so much stuff going on with all of our characters. The thing that I like about these two chapters specifically is we're not really focusing down on one character. There's things happening, bad things or rough things or interesting things happening to just about every one of our characters in these battles. So,
yeah. Well, can't wait to talk about it. But first, let's do some announcements.
Because we got a big one. We got a big announcement.
Yeah, and that is that the Deep Impact podcast from the Media MD guys has joined the Doof Media Podcast Network.
Yeah, I don't know what we changed what it's called constantly.
Or the Doof Partners Network, perhaps.
The Doof Work.
We actually have an official name for it. I haven't learned it yet. And totally but anyway, that means, I don't know, what does that mean? That means we're all kind of under this label now. Supporting Doof Media on Patreon now supports the Deep Impact podcast too, is one thing that might be relevant to know.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really exciting. We had been talking about this podcast for the last few episodes, I think, because you have been reading Pact and you've been listening to the podcast. I have not yet, so I just kind of listened a little bit, not enough to spoil myself anything, just get a flavor for what they were going for. And we've been talking them up, and we had been listening to some of their other shows. They do another whole kind of variety show where they talk about all different kinds of media called Media MD, and we really like what they did, and we're always looking to expand and bring new shows under our, well, I guess we have an umbrella to bring them under now, but one of the things we always wanted to do was build a network, not just our shows, a network of like-minded shows, and now the audience we have and the backers we have on Patreon are also supporting these guys, and it allows us to help them and allows them to grow and hopefully get more people, and we want to keep doing this. But this is our little first foray into it, and we're very, very excited.
Yeah. The important thing, Scott, is now I understand the appeal of like the read through format of one person hasn't read it and the other person has, and so
you're coming at it from. I gotcha.
It's nice. Yeah. All right. Well, yeah, that's awesome. We're really excited about that. And we hope everybody goes and checks them out if they haven't yet. And
yeah, we do. Yeah.
Reads Pact if you haven't read Pact yet.
I'm gonna read that their book soon.
All right.
I'm still only halfway through the monstrosity that is A Wise Man's Fear. As soon as I finish that, I read some Pact.
Well, I just finished Pact last week actually, and I adored it. So
Great.
+1.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, you can go to doofmedia.com to find Deep Impact. It's on our website now. All the episodes should be up there. If you're listening on YouTube, we haven't put them on YouTube yet, but I think we're planning to do that by the end of the week or the end. Yeah. By the start of next week, they should all be on YouTube as well. So it's exciting.
Yeah.
End of message.
End of message. All right. Let's get on into these chapters.
All right.
11.10. And we open with a reminder of where we just left off. One of the treacherous mercenaries told Victoria that the bad guys have sliced and diced their teammates. She experiences physical symptoms of powerful anxiety like trembling, and she effortfully controls her voice and her response and her poise after she hears this.
Yeah, it's like I love that we start off like almost continuing one of the threads we were talking about last week, where like we had commented that Victoria is downing an entire bottle of cough syrup and like just trying to do whatever she can to get through, and so we're seeing a reflection of just how bad she's doing. And it's kind of insane. Like I think this is a good level set too for what's going to happen by the end of this week's reading, because just thinking about her friends being chopped up into pieces is enough to make her physically tremble like this. And like, I can't imagine when we get to the part where she actually is there with them and sees it, you know?
Right. Yeah. Because I mean, so the story has set this up where she got to spend time with the navigators. She got to really see and feel the consequences of what happened to them. And it was horrible for her. And now she's contemplating that the same thing has happened to her teammates who she knows and likes, and, you know, in some case,
that's a great
very
point.
fond of. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, the fact, like, well, especially because, and we'll get into this, I think, during this week's reading, but this whole, like, her mission is to stop what happened to her happening to other people. Like, that's one of her big goals, is I want to stop this from happening to other people. And this is a failure point in her mind in that. Like, what has happened to the navigators, I wasn't able to prevent. What is now going to happen to people I really, really care about, I'm failing to prevent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. I do like that in this whole bit, though, we do have this moment where she zooms in to Sveta immediately, right? Like, she's repeating the phrase, sliced and diced a bunch of your buddies, which is what the mercenary tells her, and her head is like immediately Sveta. And we've talked a couple times throughout this arc about this idea that Victoria is dealing with the Weld news in a very specific way, i.e. Not at all. And we'll see some emotion powers later on in this chapter kind of push that thought to the front of her mind, even though she doesn't want to. But I like here, like this little bit that when she knows her team is hurt, the first person that jumps into her head is Sveta, the closest member on the team to her. And that doesn't downplay her concern for the rest of the team, right? Like, that's not saying that she's like not worried about the rest of them, but it's just reinforcing this idea that Sveta, out of all these people, is the one that she's closest with, the one she feels the most towards.
Yeah, that makes sense actually, because like as I was saying, you know, she's very fond of different members of the team. Some of them definitely more than others. And Sveta, she has literally called her best friend.
Yep.
So that makes sense that that's where her head would go, and it makes us feel it too, right? It's like that's one thing about stakes in general, is if you tell me the world is in danger, I don't feel anything. If you tell me like a handful of your friends are in danger, then I feel something. If you tell me your best friend is in danger, then you actually feel a little bit more, maybe even than that.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah, it shrinks it down to the most personal level for her.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the team tries to figure out how to proceed, and the chapter is doing that helpful thing where it reminds us what's going on and who is where in general, so that we can understand the characters' reasoning as they come to their conclusions. And also, I think from a character point of view, Victoria is taking refuge in Cape geekery, and I'm able to make this specific deep analytic reading based on the following line. I continued to find refuge in geekery.
Oh, wise Matt. How do you pluck such insightful insight and analysis from the depths of this book's text? How do you do it? I grovel.
It's just what I do.
Grovel before you. Yeah, no, but I think this is good. And I mean, the reason why this is so explicit here is because this is what Victoria is going to do a lot throughout these 2 chapters. So we set it up here and make it as explicit as possible. You know, one of the things Victoria does when she's getting overwhelmed and she feels like she's losing control of the situation, she dives into her geekery. It's a refuge for her, and she's going to do that in the next chapter. In the next chapter, there is a huge, probably maybe 1/5 of the chapter that is her just like geeking out on breakers strategically, right? She's not just doing it for fun, but I mean, part of that is how she is dealing and processing and then like stepping away from the direness of the situation into what's going on here.
Yeah, I mean, she always leverages her encyclopedic knowledge of all things parahuman when she's fighting, but I completely agree that this is a pair of chapters where it kind of gets dialed up to 11, where there's just like consecutive paragraphs of her like problem solving in her head, based on like the smallest clue that she sees.
Yeah, and I think that would be fun on its own and cool to see on its own, and maybe you could imply by reading that this is something she's doing to kind of cope with the stakes and how bad things are. But we don't have to imply, because here in this chapter we state it, very explicitly. This is what she's doing, and this will be what she continues to do.
Right. Yep. So before we get there, though, we're still, we haven't got to the fight yet. So basically, Victoria is trying to get information. So first Victoria grills Foyle on what March is after exactly. And they talk about it, but it's mainly like a lot of conjecture.
Yeah, I mean, March is this big mystery, and I think for a very understandable reason that I think we're going to get to in a big way in the future. But one of the bits of the conjecture that really jumped out at me here was Rain brings up the idea of emotional bleed through in clusters again, which is something that we haven't really talked about in a while. He specifically presses Foyle on, do you think there's any kind of emotional bleed through type of thing? She kind of shuts him down. She's like, no, that's not what's going on here. And I do think this serves structurally and functionally as a gentle reminder to the audience that is something that's still kind of, whirling around there in the ether. We don't know. We have several characters who think this is exactly what happened, but we don't know for sure whether that's true or not. And we have Rain kind of moving on a crash course towards his cluster mates again. There's going to be a big conflict coming up. The lines seem to be drawn that way. So it's a good time to bring up this idea again, because we're probably going to be exploring whether this is true or not. If another member of the cluster dies, how does that affect people? How are they going to act as they died, like Snag did? And we might be confirming or denying this thing. So if we're going to confirm or deny it, we got to remind people that it exists.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a fantastic point. Where the purpose of having Rain, I think, be with Victoria specifically is to really bring him and his issues and his character to the forefront of our mind, because, as you say, that's what's really most relevant as we're fighting kind of his nemesis, or two of his nemesises. So eventually they commit to that wonderful taboo of asking Foyle about her trigger event. And we now finally, after millions of words of parahumans, we learn the general outline of Foyle's trigger event. So apparently she was a kid in the foster system, and some of her older siblings were left out of the foster system to fend for themselves. One of them became homeless and then ended up attacking Lily on a subway platform. Foyle isn't clear on what role March was actually playing here, why she triggered, and the third cluster member is someone that Foyle also doesn't know much about. So it's very interesting, because it's cool to know this information, but it tells us kind of intentionally frustratingly little about the nature of the situation and why why March might be the way she is and why her cluster might be the way it is.
Yeah, I think it gives enough to where you can make educated guesses on why their powers might have expressed themselves in the way that they have. But you're absolutely right. This is the bare minimum of info, and it feels like a designed bare minimum of info. Mm-hmm. And I think that's because like this idea of March and who March is and what March wants and how all this happened seems to be like one of the big mysteries of like of the story so far. Like we know this we have this idea of this cluster and like what she's gathering clusters that has something to do with this big thing that's the key to everything possibly. And so we don't want to reveal all that just now. Like we're leading up to something, so a little bit of bare minimum information, and it's laying the tracks for more information.
I get it. So Victoria wonders out loud a number of interesting possibilities. Like, for example, maybe there was a power involved in the trigger event, which would explain in Victoria's mind why Foyle's power is so strong. Mm-hmm. Or maybe why March is so particularly dialed in to like how clusters work, since she's the one who figured out this hack.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, how clusters work, how this cluster works. All of these are like one of, like we said, the big unanswered questions in the story, and they are seeming to relate to the broken trigger idea, this well of energy that people keep seeing when they trigger. They all seem to be related, and we'll get mixed into more how they're related when we deal with Colt in the next chapter. But yeah, this is the central mystery of the story so far, and it makes sense that we're not going to get it in a exposition story from Foyle yet.
Yeah, this conversation reminds me that March, had speaking lines in the prelude to the story. So obviously her presence is sort of fundamental to everything that's going on here.
Yeah, that's true. She was the one with the answers, right? Like we had in the prologue, we had, I guess it was Rain looking for answers to his question, and she was the one offering them. And here, almost a million words later, we still haven't really gotten answers to those questions yet because they're so important to the story at large. Yeah,
and Colt's presence in the story hasn't actually really shed any light on how Rain's cluster works either. It's just it's all very mysterious and more mysterious now, if anything.
Yeah.
So Foyle goes on to explain that March kept joining the villain teams in, I guess it was New York, just so that she would have an excuse to fight Foyle, and that further that March always considered it a game.
Yeah, I love that the text needs to differentiate between a game in the March sense and the game in the cops and robbers sense. Mm-hmm. It's just a wonderfully delightful but consistent beat there where we need to draw a difference between these two things. Mm-hmm. And the fact that this is all a game seems to really frustrate March. Seems to really frustrate Foyle. Like, she saw herself as the consummate professional. She took this stuff very seriously, and she had this nagging person following her around that all thought it was fun and games. I do like that we get this little window into why that might be, why she treated it as a game from Candy's perspective, who after that states something about how making it a game is how you cope with it. She says the worse something is, the more you have to treat it like it's nothing, which is, I think, a cool lens into maybe like the complicated past of March and what's going on with her. But it also, more importantly, is a little window into why the Heartbroken are the way they are, right? Like, we've been talking about these characters that are just like so like kind of off the wall ridiculous sometimes with this concerning undertone to them. And this is a little window into why they act that way, and they seem aware of it, that they like, you can't take this stuff, you have to treat it like it's nothing, or then it's everything.
Yeah, right. That's how they've chosen to basically kind of recalibrate their sense of what is something they can deal with, and some of them handle it differently than others. But I think Candy's definitely one who you can actually say like her way of dealing with it has been to act like it's all so blasé and doesn't affect her.
Yeah. It's sad. It's really sad. Yeah. Before we move on, though, I just wanted to highlight this one moment as well, because Victoria is waiting for Foyle to dish on her story, and Foyle is really hesitating. Like, she drew in a deep breath, then she hesitated, which was annoying, but annoying was better than freaking out over what might be happening to Sveta. And then she immediately shifts to that, italicized internal monologue bit and says, answers. We find them, we help others. If needed, we break all of Cradle's limbs and get him to tell us how to undo what he did to the navigators. And I love this little window into Victoria's state of mind here, right? Like she's mildly annoyed at Foyle hesitating here, but she's recognizing that annoyance, and how it is at least better than freaking out. But even thinking about how that annoyance is better than freaking out kind of makes her internally freak out. And she's like, I'm gonna torture Cradle. I'm gonna break all his limbs until he tells me what I need to know. And that's like a little disturbing in how like extreme she's willing to go at this point. Whether or not it's deserved or not, like she's in a really angry, annoyed place, and she's going to be confronting these people.
Right. I mean, it's definitely worth pointing out as we kind of track through the story over these many arcs and chapters that even when she was fighting Goddess or the Fallen, she didn't have this like edge of bloody mindedness to it. Like, I mean, she crushed Valefor's jaw, but like she wasn't like fantasizing about doing it beforehand.
Yeah.
Like, and you know, she basically it's all been very utilitarian and like, okay, well, this is according to the warrior monk, the necessary, right? It's necessary.
Yeah.
This is just her, like, not that she's like excited about the prospect of hurting someone, but she's so angry that she's like already decided that she's willing to be, you know, to go too far, if you will, relative to where she normally finds herself. Yeah.
And I think I have a long, almost essay written somewhere in the script that we're going to get to about this idea of the level of violence that she's going to be enacting on people. And because I think it's an important beat for her character. It's an important shift in her thinking.
Yeah. So yeah, when the team returns to the van that they arrived in, they question the van driver and then they knock his ass out.
Take that, potentially traitorous dude. We didn't actually know for sure, but it makes things better.
Yep, you're probably on it. Yeah.
I do love, there's this one part that I love so much, and it's this perfect window into Victoria's mindset right now. As she's trying to ponder what she and the team needs to do next, she's thinking, okay, we have two options here. We have fight or flight. And she sees, as they walk towards the van, she sees the man, the driver that they're about to knock out, freeze in place. And she thinks to herself, freeze is another option for the guy, not for us. Other people couldn't afford for us to freeze. And I love this so much because this is a perfect window into Victoria. This is this idea of, I have to do something. It can be attacking, it can be retreating, but I can't stand still. I can't do nothing. I have to, and it's a different from Taylor's I have to do something, right? Because the flight option is there in her head. That is an option for us, you know, retreating, regrouping. That's something we've seen her do throughout the story. Like, that's something we saw her do in the very first arc of the story, was when she was around nursery, just went, nope.
Yep.
We like she has these two options, but the middle option is not, like, you have to make a choice. You have to make a choice. You have to do something. You have to choose between one of these two things. Freezing is not an option. That's not something that we have. And that's Victoria. And that's, like, it's gotten her in trouble in the past. It's allowed her to save the day in the past, but that is quintessentially who she is.
Yeah, I love this. And I want to read a lot into the use of the word freeze too, because I would actually call running due to fear like a kind of freezing. Like,
sure.
What she's talking about when she's thinking about flight is she's thinking about like a strategic retreat in a situation where you have rationally concluded that you can't win.
Yeah.
And pretty much every time in her life, or, you know, in the story that we've seen Victoria run away, it was like, oh, the Siberians here or something, where it was like, yeah, you should run. That would be the smart thing to do. But not just like, I'm afraid. Like, she's always either fighting because she's trying to win, or she's fleeing because she knows that the smarter thing to do is to get her allies and regroup or whatever.
Yeah.
So I like that, because like, freeze to me is a very interesting word here, where it's basically conveying almost something just along the lines of like, act non-strategically.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which she's that's just like anathema to who she is.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, and just to set up a point I'm going to make a little bit later in the episode, it is something that Colt is very bad at. Not freeze. No, it's freezing is something Colt is very good at. Choosing between the options is something Colt is very bad at. And Victoria basically tells her to freeze when she's trying to convince her of things. So I think this is maybe not an intentional setup, but it does play off each other very well. To Victoria, doing nothing is not an option. To Colt, doing nothing is usually the easiest option.
Yeah, I mean, I want to go further and say that Colt's power is to make people freeze. It presents them with complete indecision, which it means you're neither making a strategic retreat nor a calculated attack. You're just stuck in place.
Yeah, I love that. I love that.
I now that we've picked that out, that really feels intentional.
I think so. Yeah.
So Foil and Precipice have like an actual argument over who gets to drive the van, and then Victoria makes the leadership call and says Rain gets to drive.
Yeah, one of the things I've enjoyed most of in these last 4 chapters, or few chapters rather, I don't know how many it is, and I think it's just because there's so few things to like enjoy from a that's nice perspective, because everything's so horrible. But it is spending this extra time with Rain and watching him kind of bounce off of each of the other characters on the team and observing how that goes. We see him bounce off of Chastity, and we see in that situation. Now we're kind of seeing this little spat between him and Foil. And I think it's adorable because like you understand why Rain, like he doesn't like push that hard against stuff sometimes, but like he does here. And I think it's because he sees in his view of himself, this kind of pessimistic, like downtrodden, I'm shitty at everything kind of view. He's like, driving's the one thing I'm good at. I need you have to let me do this because it's the one thing I'm good at. And Foil's like, no, my power makes me better at it. And he's like, no, but this is what I got. And Victoria sides with him, which is, I mean, she doesn't specifically say she's doing it like strategically because he needs to pick me up or he needs to win or whatever. But I think it might not be explicit subtext, but you can kind of feel it there.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I also just felt like it was funny because I could put myself in Rain's position where I'm like, yeah, I know how to drive. I'm an experienced driver. And then and someone were like, well, I have a superpower that gives me a sense of timing and angles. I'd be like, good for you. That doesn't mean you know how to drive.
Yeah, fuck you too.
Right. Right. Like, I don't know. I mean, it's funny that I actually took Rain's side in this in my head. But anyway,
that is funny. I was totally like, yeah, Foil should drive. Just seems better.
Well, now we can start a new thread that's Rain versus Foil, who should have been allowed to drive.
It's the new was Saint right or wrong?
Yeah, there we go. That's it. So now, important moment. Victoria gives Foil a gun, which is just a fascinating character moment to me.
Yeah,
because
it is.
This has been a consistent beat throughout this story. This is Victoria, who felt sick to her stomach that guns were involved in the Fallen conflict at all, who felt absolutely like betrayed that Fume Hood got shot at the community center brawl at the start of the story. Guns have been this constant drumbeat of just something that she just found completely unacceptable throughout the whole story. They symbolize everything that she hates about the denigration of the Cape scene. And now here she is condoning, nay, ordering the use of a handgun in a Cape fight.
Yeah, and I know what you're thinking, YouTube commenters. You're thinking, this isn't that big of a deal because functionally a crossbow bolt with Foil's power on it isn't any different from a bullet. And you're right. Except it is. Because what matters here is not the end effect of the weapon. What matters here is not the weapon itself. What matters here is, just as Matt pointed out, is our protagonist character's changing viewpoint on the necessity of the weapon. And it does show a shift in Victoria. And yes, the shift could be brought about by necessities of the world she lives in. Yes, you could absolutely make the argument the idea that we can't use guns anymore is a foolish one because the world has gotten worse. Stakes have gotten higher. Violence is more prominent in these Cape fights, and we need to do this. That all can be true, and it still is a shift in how the protagonist feels about the usage of guns amongst Cape battles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even if she felt the same way about it, it would indicate that her view of how bad things have gotten is such that, well, okay, now this is necessary. And we know already that she feels terrible about that fact. And I also, I mean, I like that it's foil that she gives it to, and I like that you can, I like that you can make the argument, oh, it doesn't matter so much, because the thing is, you kind of like somewhere in Victoria's head, she might be making that same argument. This isn't a big deal. Foil's power is already more powerful than a handgun, so I'm not making that big of a change by giving Foil a gun. But that's like exactly the kind of line of reasoning that you use to justify, this choice, and then the next time somebody else has a gun, and then you say, well, I did give Foil a gun, so
right. And that I think that is the point. But like I think sometimes we get lost in the, is this right or wrong based on X standard or Y standard. I don't think that matters. I think the point is Victoria felt a certain way, now Victoria feels a different way. And that's a progress of a character down a path.
Yep.
Whether or not it's a good path or bad path, I don't care. But that is a change that she's going through, and we're going to have to see the consequences of that change one way or the other.
Yep. So we just get this little moment where they're talking about the prospect of tying up the mercenaries and the villains they've captured. And they mention the idea that maybe you don't want to tie people up because they might react really badly. And then one of the two heartbroken women says, I know someone like that, except not being tied up. She freaks out and sometimes even barfs every time she gets tied up. Yeah.
Poor Darlene.
Yep.
I wonder, if this is one of those, we implied this in chapter A, but not enough people got it. So here's me reinforcing it 100% in chapter B, just to make sure you've all gotten it things,
Maybe. Yeah. I think I'm not sure exactly the function of it. I mean, it reminds us, oh yeah, that happened. I guess it's keeping us in the headspace of like, oh yeah, that chapter that we just read. It needs to be at the forefront of our minds because it's relevant right now.
Sure. Yeah, that's true. That is true.
So Victoria flies along outside the van to serve as a point of support in case it's needed. And then, as she's flying, she painstakingly uses her Kenzie wristband to zoom in on the red team, which is the one that was captured whole.
I don't like your wording there. It's mean. I don't like it. Don't like it.
Okay.
But I think I like that you pulled this out, though, because structurally, I think this is why this chapter in particular works so well. We have these other two teams. They're captured. We know one of them's in pieces. Victoria doesn't know that, but we do. We know the other team is just captured, and she's trying to make a decision. She's trying to decide to go forward, to fight or fly, how to do this, what to do, and the urgency is there because she continues to check this thing in the first half of the chapter. She continues to check the map and see that one team is moving away from her. It's moving towards the university, it feels like. And if it gets there where the other team is, that's not good. And it just really helps elevate the tension here as she's trying to make these decisions. And I think that's why this chapter is as propulsive as it is. I don't know. I can't say that word today.
Yeah, I agree. I think maybe structurally serving a similar purpose to that line about that line kind of obliquely referencing Darlene that we just got, where we're with Victoria here, but we're being reminded, hey, these are the stakes. This is what just happened. This is what's going on. Let that lend a little bit of dread to this moment.
Yeah.
So Victoria continues a few more short conversations with various people while she's flying along with the van, but all these conversations are hampered by the wind and other logistical difficulties. The most interesting one to me is Foil's sharing of what's going on with Tattletale, and it's just, for me, it might be the most fascinating part of these two chapters, and the part that I thought about the most, which may be odd, but there it is, because it seems to me that Tattletale's read on Foil is actually just wrong, or at least biased in a completely negative way, to the extent that it might as well be wrong. Because what we're seeing is that Lily actually cares about Tattletale, at least somewhat, and has put a lot of thought into how into how Tattletale thinks, what she's doing, how she operates, and why she is the way she is. And Foil's downright defensive of Tattletale.
Yeah.
And that just clashes so amazingly with Tattletale's obvious view of how Foyle sees her.
Yeah, I loved this. Absolutely. It was so great. And I think you're absolutely right that, like, you know, I think you still see enough of Foyle's opinion on Tattletale in this section to understand where Lisa's reading came from, right? Like, she acknowledges that she finds Tattletale manipulative. She does say that her view on her isn't charitable. She basically says she can be a total bitch sometimes. And that's the part of Foyle's opinion that Tattletale got a read on, right? The part that admits that she's not charitable, that admits she can be a real bitch. That's the part that Tattletale picked up on. The rest of it, she didn't. This part where she, like, understands her on a level that I don't think anyone has audibly understood Lisa in this story yet. The thing that I found most fascinating with this is, like, I think we had this image of who Tattletale was, and it was like floating around, and I just didn't have, like, a good way to describe it. And then Foyle starts talking, and, like, all of my, like, emotion-based image of who Tattletale was, like, started slotting into this frame that the things that Foyle is saying represent. So it's just like, it's not like we learned this new information about Lisa, right? Like, there's no big reveal moment here. It's just the behavior starts to make sense based on this frame. Why she's, like, so miserable, why all this stuff happening is starting to slot into this thing. And it's just like this moment of clarity where you're just like, of course that's the way it is.
Yeah. And it's even more beautiful again, because it's Foyle saying it. It's this character who we've been told through the text kind of indirectly, like, oh, Foyle hates Tattletale.
Yeah.
It's like, no. And the fact that you're wrong about that says a lot.
Yeah. Absolutely. And before we move on, I do want to talk about the setting of this conversation, because I do think it matters. As you said, they're flying along through the air. Foyle is sitting in a car with the window down talking to Victoria, who's flying along, and Rachel is there riding a dog, and the wind is blowing. It's really loud. Rachel has, like, super good hearing, which I don't remember that being a thing in the past. Was it? I don't remember.
Don't recall.
That feels like it's something new. Anyway, I love the setting because, like, first of all, it has to make sense functionally, because we've just, half the chapter so far has been us talking about what we're going to do next, and we finally pick something and we're going towards it, and we want to have this character beat moment, but we can't have characters sit around and talk anymore, because, like, we've just defined how tense and immediate the stakes are. So it has to happen on the move. And then we do it in this way where, like, we have these characters who have such complicated feelings about this person, and it's told in, like, the most difficult way possible, where they're, like, screaming at each other. They can barely hear each other. It's like this difficult, complex conversation set in an environment that is super complex and hard to understand. And I think, like, that setting just fits what we're talking about so perfectly.
Yeah, right. Like you're not sure if the other people are hearing everything you're saying, and you're having trouble hearing parts of what they're saying. And it's like, yeah, that's a metaphor for this whole thing.
Yep.
It's happening. Yeah, I'm glad you pointed out how kind of interesting this scene is, because my visual brain then, like, rendered, like, the shot, like you're looking at the profile of Foyle out the car window, and then you're seeing Victoria kind of hanging on to the window, and then in the background of the shot is Rachel and her dog. Yeah, I want this fan art.
It's really great.
Yeah. No, it's a really cool scene. Like, there's very few just sitting on couches scenes.
Yeah.
At least in this part of the story, certainly. So I mean, this Foyle dialogue, I love how this kind of wraps up, where she says, except they're okay now. Foyle's expression had changed below her visor. She was almost smiling, but it was a sad smile. Imp's okay. Rachel's okay now. Parian and I are okay. Heartbroken or less broken than ever. New Brockton was even okay. The ones who aren't or who couldn't be okay are dead. Sorry, I read that last sentence in that tone. But anyway,
you're very happy about it. They're dead.
They're dead. They're not a problem anymore. But the point is that, like, this is definitely not how Tattletale sees it. Like, for Tattletale, everything is dire. Everybody is on the edge of annihilation, and nobody likes her.
Yep. You're absolutely right. And that is such a perfect window into why she behaves the way she does.
Yep. And then she goes on and says she has a purpose, but it's killing her. She looks after the city. It's that thing that drains her and brings out the worst in her. It doesn't fill that need she has, but she does it because she has to.
I love this so much. I love this idea that she's not doing the thing she's meant to be doing, right? Like this idea that the actual citywide control is just not the ideal use of her power. It's not where it shines. It's functional, but it's not using it its best, and it also doesn't fill her trauma-driven need there. She's doing it because she feels like she has to.
Yeah, it feels like a conflict between character wants and character needs being conveyed fairly directly. And I mean, yeah, it's fundamentally why she's in the situation she's in, and why she's continually wound up in the situations she's wound up in throughout the story.
Yeah, and it also means that she's like spinning out, like reaching for new projects. I mean, that's the one thing they say here is that she sets her sight on Chicken Little as the next project. Here's the next person I'm going to help. Here's a someone in need, and my trauma requires me to try to help them along. And once again, Foyle says he's relatively okay too. I mean, like, yeah, everyone has a little bit of problems, but like Aiden's okay, and by trying to aid him, she could actually only hurt herself, only hurt him, drive him away. Like, and this is stuff that she struggled with throughout the entire story, right? Like, I mean, she sets her sights on people. She says, this person needs me. I need to help them. And she does that in horribly destructive ways in the end. I mean, we talked in Worm about how Lisa served as an enabler for some of Taylor's worst tendencies. And she was there to always help out when Taylor wanted to do something. She was there to make sure she could do it and make sure she was successful with it. And we could be seeing that cycle play out again unless someone chops her into pieces.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's fascinating that now that we've been inside her head twice, but it was in this last this Ward Tattletale interlude where we really saw, like, obviously she doesn't see herself as an enabler. Obviously she thinks this is all absolutely necessary behavior and that she's helping. And in fact, in her mind, she may be the only thing keeping these people away from self-destruction or whatever. And it's like, I mean, that's self-serving doesn't feel like the right word. It's because she doesn't want them to suffer. It's just, that's how she sees it. She just, and now, like, I think I'm kind of coming around to the view that, like, maybe the reason she sees it that way is that her power is constantly feeding her just the information she needs to believe that everything is dire, so that she's motivated to act on it.
Yeah, I think that is very in tune with both the trauma, with her character, with what shards would do to fuck with you. I think that lines up on all accounts. So I completely agree.
Cool.
And I think the one thing we have to say before we move on here is how similar this is to Victoria in some respects, right? Like, Victoria, like Lisa, is this person who is running herself ragged trying to save the city. She's doing it in a different way than Tattletale does it. They're very different people, but they are both pushing themselves to the extreme to try to save everyone. They have their projects. We're going to see it when Victoria gets hit by the anxiety blast, when she's forced by this emotional power to list out every single thing that's making her anxious. And we see how long and full and insane the list is, just like we've seen earlier in this book. And like, it's so funny to me how similar these characters can be in times.
Yeah. No, that's great. I didn't pick that out actually, but I love that. So, So
it's time.
It's time for fighting. So the van is ambushed by a nail biter, but the heroes are ready for it, mostly due to Victoria's good battlefield leadership, leading their team to already be kind of prepared for an attack. I think we should talk more in general about Victoria's, like, leadership qualities, especially as a field commander.
Yeah, I think it's really good, and it's good in a very interesting way. We've kind of compared and contrasted how her battlefield, like, leadership and lines up with Taylor's and how they're different. I mean, like hers is very much, scholarly based, whereas this Taylor's is very much more instinctual based. The thing that I like about it, and the thing that I really saw throughout this fight, is in Worm, Taylor would be fighting and she would be, leading or being the tactician of the group. And we would see it all kind of happening, right? Like she would be checking out all the different fights and what's going on. In this fight, there's a lot of different people fighting a lot of different people. And Victoria occasionally like flies up in the air and like catches herself up on what's going on. But like we don't see Rachel beat Nailbiter. Like we don't see that happen. We don't see these other fights that go on and those characters win because her tactical awareness is a different kind, right? It's not the same thing. It's not this like broad battlefield awareness. And I like that it's like, it's still enough to give us clarity as far as what is happening goes, but it is different. It is like she flies up in the air, helps command some troops, moves people in different places, and then dives into her part, and we lose vision on all that other stuff, and then we don't come back to it again until she's done with her skirmish or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a great point. Like she's having to make leadership calls using a much more narrow focus, and usually still making great calls. Yeah. I mean, I guess while we're on the topic of kind of comparing her to Taylor, a lot of her cognition during the fighting is on this kind of like mental loop of, all right, let me determine what the right thing to do here is. Not just how do I achieve objective X, because achieving objective X may be most efficiently achieved by picking up a car and smashing someone with it. But that's not where her head is at. She's trying to calculate not just how do we win, but how do we win in a way that preserves like these 15 bullet points of like team reputation and not injuring anyone too badly and making sure that no one is put in a situation that would trigger their horrible trauma. And like that's, for me, that's a lot of the fun of Victoria being the protagonist actually is the just like the wonderful moral rectitude of her inner life. Like I don't know, it's like Jean-Luc Picard is a superhero.
Yeah, I mean, it's like we've always talked about in these stories how the heroes kind of have to fight with one hand tied behind their back. Mm-hmm. And we're now seeing what the point of view of that tied hand looks like, right? We're like surveying, strategizing, and planning with the knowledge right there that the thing that I could do to definitely win the fight is something I'm not willing to do. Yeah, right.
Doesn't stop the fights from being awesome, though.
No, it doesn't.
We're going to get into that now. So Victoria's foot is clipped by one of Nailbiter's nails, which sounds really painful. Like that sounds more painful to me than like the other stuff that happens in this arc for some reason.
Does it really sound more painful than the other things that happen in this arc?
You know, I can imagine having a nail stabbed through my foot. I can't actually imagine having something like severed with a whip of energy or whatever it is.
All right, that's fair.
So that's where I'm coming from there.
It also like coolly makes it so she can't like walk for the rest of the fight, and she's basically flying. Mm-hmm. Even when she's on the ground, she's basically hovering the entire time, which is
I'm glad you pointed that out because I thought that was a nice moment. Not only is it just cool, but it's also this little tiny thing. We've seen this development of her becoming more and more reliant and, being willing to exploit her powers over the course of the story. We mentioned this many times at the beginning of the story. She wasn't even flying. It was a big deal that she flew somewhere. Now she is basically stuck always flying because her foot is injured. And I mean, that feels very intentional to me.
Yeah.
So the team is attacked by a mysterious breaker, a flyer with long, wild, silver glowy hair, black cutting blades, and a momentum canceling power, and an emotions power too. Uh-oh.
Hey, those sound really familiar, Matt. It's like someone took all Rain's power and made them like good or something.
Yeah.
But that would mean that
I'm not even sure what that means, but yeah, it's I mean, we guess who it is pretty much immediately, but it's still kind of, but why? But why did this happen? So yeah, the emotions power hits Victoria, and it's a flood of anxiety and uncertainty, overwhelming her with a chaotic jumble of every single thing she's worried about. We get several paragraphs of all the overwhelming difficulties and obligations that are stacked upon our protagonist.
Yeah, and this is what we were talking about earlier. I mean, like, I know that this is the work of a power bringing these to the surface, but one of the things that is true throughout every single one of these, specifically Rain Cluster emotion powers is they don't like create those thoughts, right? They just bring them to the surface. Like the emotion pulls those to the surface. So like this is all true stuff that she's in somewhere in the back of her mind always thinking about. And here it is right here on the surface. And you just see how overwhelming it is.
Mm-hmm.
And then we learn later that this is a weakened version of this attack because she's slightly resistant to it, which is just like...
Right. YouTube user and Doof supporter patron J Maniac has been making these YouTube videos that are like talking about how Wildbow basically makes certain powers serve the function of different narrative tropes or narrative sort of modalities and functions.
Yeah.
And my I almost want to call this emotion power the stakes power because it reminds you of all of the stakes that Victoria is juggling, and only some of them are like I have to keep people safe from violence. Many of them are just like I want to shepherd the young heroes and stuff like that, like just things where it's stuff that she needs to feel like she's being a good person in the world, but it's all pressing on her just as much, you know.
Yeah,
I completely agree. Not all to the same degree, of course, but like I just think this is a great way of reminding us who this character is to remind us what are all the things that she worries about.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. Like these emotion powers are so fascinating because each and every one of them serves a narrative function for our main character. Like we have snags all the way back in the beginning of the story and how utterly cutting his despair was on Victoria. The regret and doubt that Rain gives her, the anxiety that she gets here. Later in the next chapter, she's going to get full on rage as she's fighting Love Lost. It's just a perfect kind of encapsulation of what our character's going through at the given moment, made manifest in the literal through a genre story.
Yeah, that's great. Is the only one she hasn't been subjected to yet Cradles? Is that accurate?
I think so, because we're still very unclear as to what his actually is. That's the one I think we're still not sure. I don't think we've seen it. Yeah,
no, that's really cool though that she gets we knock out both Love Lost and the new cluster member in this chapter. So yeah, that's cool. I wonder if that suggests anything about what's going to happen in the future.
You're doing it again. We were supposed to record this episode on Monday, and I was so excited to get to the end of the last chapter and be like, so Matt, what do you think is going to happen next? And you wouldn't be able to just deflect the answer.
I know.
But then we had to change the recording date, and it's ruined.
But you know that when I make statements like that, they're statements from the simulated Matt who hasn't read the chapter that I have in my head.
Yeah, oh, sure.
Because after doing the whole Worm podcast for a year, I split into two people, one of whom basically hadn't read any of the future chapters. Anyway.
I like that version better.
Well, that's who you're talking to right now. So the mysterious breaker cuts down a lamppost and it crashes in front of the van and causes the van to crash and tip over, I think. It's a pretty bad crash, actually. I like how we don't actually learn whether Chastity canceled out her power or not. So we're just uncertain as to whether she got that backlash and now Lord of Lost is awake again. We're not sure how bad this was that this happened.
Yeah, it's great. But like, there is that moment where you're like, oh shit, did it just go from bad to worse? Like from a storytelling perspective, though, I'm really glad we didn't like free Lord of Lost and have to fight him again here. Like, I loved that fight so much.
Yeah.
We don't need to do that again.
Yeah. I think you're right.
So it's a cool, like, holy shit, did this just get really bad moment? But you're like, oh, thank God.
Yeah.
We're not doing that. Yeah.
I agree. And then the chapter ends because certain readers need things to be spelled out for us really clearly. Those powers. What the hell had Love Lost done to add another member to Rain's cluster?
And yeah, this might sound like Matt's being mean to you readers out there, but notice he said us there because he's talking about himself.
Yeah, let's analyze the word choice of Matt's statement here.
No, I mean, it's really great. I love that Victoria, in all her nerdiness, like goes there immediately, right? Like, and I think because Victoria has proven her cake geekery, there's, I think, an implied like you trust her in that moment. Like you trust that, okay, she's jumping to a conclusion here, but because it's Victoria, you're like, okay, she's probably right there, because if there's one thing she knows, it's capes.
Yep.
And it's also narratively like the most delicious little mix on this whole thing that we've seen yet. I love it.
Yeah, it's amazing. And
we don't learn anything about it yet. We just get this thing dropped, and then we fight her, and then we just don't get to find out.
But I mean, this is fun because, yeah, it's a fun, like, what's going on? And then, like, the next chapter, we pretty much learn. I mean, we don't really learn. We don't learn why she joined the cluster. Like, that still doesn't make sense. But we learn pretty much everything about how her power set works in this next chapter, and in a really fun and satisfying way. So, you know, it's paid off really quickly, and that's fun. I mean, sometimes it's nice for a payoff to be delayed, like that's storytelling. But it's fun that in this case, it's like, you know, let's just find out right now.
Well, and if you delay part of the payoff, but not all of the payoff, it's inherently less frustrating because you feel like you're still learning something, even though you don't know the whole story yet.
Good point. I like that. 11:11. And this chapter starts in the midst of Victoria being hit with another litany of worries and anxieties.
I love it so much. I love the fact that we start like in the middle of this emotional blast. And once again, this allows us to get a little window into Victoria's mindset here. And we already talked about this, but I just love that they don't create feelings. They just bring them to the surface. And we see like the failing, like her failure with Chris and how that failed Jessica. Like, and this is the moment where she finally admits to the Weld and Sveta situation. She admits that, yes, I'm worried about this. I'm anxious about this, but this thing was so easy to shove aside when there was so much other stuff going on. But here it is at the surface. And then she goes to the rest of the group. I'm worried about Kenzie, and I'm worried about Rain, and about Tristan, and about Byron, and Ashley, and Damsel, and even Natalie.
Yeah, even Natalie.
She still throws shade at Natalie in her head when she does. I love that. Even Natalie. I'm worried about even Natalie.
Yeah.
And then, great. Of course, she says, she ends with, I'm worried about her. She's worried about herself, too, which is good. Because, you know, think about yourself, Victoria. Just sometimes. You want to be selfish, but just to worry about yourself just a little bit.
Yeah. I love all the emotion powers in the mall cluster, because they're not really emotions. They're more like parts of you that have the volume turned up way too loud.
Yeah.
Like the anxious part of you is always, I mean, every person has voices that inject their worries into their mind. And if you have a lot of those, and it happens a lot, then you have anxiety. And if they happen in a moderate and controllable amount, then, you know, you're just kind of going through your life, and sometimes things worry you and sometimes you're fine.
Yeah.
The same can be said about the doubt power too. Sometimes you doubt yourself. Sometimes you doubt yourself more than you should. And what these powers do is they just make that be the dominant thing in your mind. Right.
I mean, anxiety attacks are real things, and people go through them, and they just hit you with no warning, and you're completely debilitated from it. And that is this made manifest. Like, that is exactly what's happening here.
Right.
And yeah, it's so good.
Yeah. Right. I mean, I think I only just now thought of like phrasing it that way, but like they are more than an emotion, right? It's emotion is a simpler concept than what is happening here. So
yeah,
I think it's pretty awesome. So this time, Victoria is struck by a piece of falling building while she's kind of zoned out in this anxiety attack. I guess I like that label for it. And she's almost injured, but she's saved by the wretch. So she realizes she needs to give this new mysterious breaker some distance. Anyway, she thinks, those feelings, the doubts, the hesitations, I knew where they were coming from. Somewhere down there, near the driver's seat, Precipice was extending his power up toward me. I had to face those feelings, use them to forge myself into someone more effective, or quash them. Were they useful to Victoria Dallin, the scholar, the warrior monk? Hell, I wouldn't even rule out the wretch. And I thought this was a fascinating paragraph. First of all, she's bringing back all of these kind of sub-personalities that she's concocted. But I think it's fascinating that she views them this way. Are they useful? Because like, this is a character who's let a lot of bad feelings control her life. And it's very interesting to see her apply this heuristic of, are these feelings useful?
it kind of seems like a stage of recovery to me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's this idea that she's had these really difficult to deal with feelings, and she's kind of been running from them in a bit, pushing them away, not thinking about them. Like the entire concept of the warrior monk is to separate herself from certain feelings, to not let her spiral out of control. But now, because she has to, she's forcing Rain to make her face her feelings of doubt.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something we didn't talk about earlier in last chapter, when she said, as they were driving to the location, she said to Rain, "Hit me again." And you're like, wait, I thought that was just like Lord of Lost is really hard to beat, and we just needed it for that fight. But she's like, no, just fucking nail me with doubt again. Keep doing it. And yeah, so his power is making her face them. And that's, I think, what you do in recovery, what you do when you're trying to get better is you take the feelings you're having, and you either, if they serve a use, if they serve to teach you something, you deal with them. And if they don't do that, if they have no use, if they're useless, if they just need to be squashed, you get them out of there. You get rid of them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what she's doing here, in effect. She's dealing with all these feelings she's had, and she's either deciding, can they help me? Can they make me better? Or are they just useless feelings that need to be destroyed? And like, it doesn't matter to me that this is happening because of a power. Like, it doesn't matter to me that like this is happening because Rain's doing this to her, because sometimes like we don't get to choose when we're forced to deal with our worst impulses and push our way through them. Sometimes that is thrust upon us by the situation. And I feel like that's what's happening here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree that it's a sign of growth and recovery, because, you know, I think many different therapeutic modalities have this concept of like, are you in the trauma and the emotion? Does it feel like that's just how the world is? Or are you able to separate from it and look at it and look at your mind doing that thing and say, that's there, but that's not me. And I can choose whether I want that to continue to influence me.
Yeah.
And you don't necessarily always have that option. Like if you're really just like freshly damaged by something, you can't always just say like, I'm going to just put that at arm's length and say, I don't want to deal with that right now. Sometimes that just feels like how the world is to you. Yeah. But she's got to the point now where she's capable of taking a lot of these things that have been weighing on her and saying, you know what, I am capable of detaching from this a little bit in a way that is actually productive, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And that's one of the things about her whole kind of, I refuse to forgive and forget philosophy, because she says, if I forgive this, if I move on from this, then I will not have learned the lesson from it, right? That was like the big reason she didn't want Amy to erase her memory, and she doesn't want to be put herself in a situation where what happened to her will happen to her again. So she's holding on to these feelings. And I think this is a way where you can look at the feeling, you can look at the trauma and take the part of it that you can use to make yourself better, to survive in this world, to do those kind of things, while getting rid of all the terrible parts that are like causing you to spiral and like destroying you and making you feel miserable. You're able to, if you can actualize yourself to do that. And that kind of, I just feel like that's what's happening.
Yeah, I agree completely. In fact, you said things just then that I was going to say in response to you. And so,
well, there we go.
So I'm done.
So I guess that means we have to move on.
Yeah, I guess it does. And we move on to, once again, Victoria remembering what her mother has said in the past. Don't get angry, get even. My mother's words in my own voice running through my head, a condemnation, even though the tone was level, instructive. And Precipice's power was making that all the more pointed, turning every failure into a sharp, pointed lesson. And I think that paragraph is fantastic to follow up, to underline that beat we just mentioned.
Yeah.
Because, like, it's a sharp, painful lesson that you shouldn't dwell in negative emotions when you can do something about it. And it forces me to wonder how long these little lessons will persist once Rain's power stops being actively applied. Is she now permanently really good at fighting Lord of Loss? And perhaps more interestingly, is she now permanently going to start evaluating her emotions based on their utility?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we tie it back to that metaphor we were talking about, then hopefully, right? Because it's like you're not just, it's not just temporary power induced learning. You're actually taking steps forward. You're actually getting better. You're actually learning how to actualize a little bit better, and move towards that recovery. So I want to say yes. I don't know. I think like the literal definition of it is she going to be better at fighting Lord of Loss? I don't know. Maybe, probably. But the metaphorical, yes, this is going to stay with her. Yes, this is going to help her better handle her emotions and better know what to do. That feels like yes. That feels like what this is going to do. Mm-hmm. And I guess we've talked about this in the entirety of it being positive, right? Like this is a positive experience for her, but it's also like really emotionally devastating while you're doing it. Like it doesn't feel good. Yes, you might be taking steps and being able to remove yourself from feelings, but it also is like overwhelming to a really bad degree. And if you like confront too much of it too quickly, AKA tell Rain to keep going even when you're like miserable, it could backfire on you. I think she's manages to get through it okay in this chapter, but it's probably not a thing she should like do like daily.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see how we go on from here, because I think what we're both saying is we see a lot of positive potential to this concept, like in terms of what it's saying about about human nature, and about Victoria specifically as a character, but also there's always a flip side to it. Like you're saying, like it's certainly possible to like ruminate and blame yourself too much, learn lessons that aren't even really true, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Before we go on though, can we talk about how awesome her relationship with her mom is? Like in the story, like how wonderfully complex, like how often she returns to her guidance as a source of strength in tough times, while simultaneously like resenting her as a mother. It's so complicated and real to me. Like it's almost like on the surface you could see it as like, well, so she's a terrible mother, but she taught you so much. Isn't that a little hypocritical? And the answer is no, it's not. This is just like what complex family relationships are like. And I just love it so much.
Right. Especially parent-child relationships. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So finally, Colt attacks the van, which Rachel is guarding with her dogs. And then we're reminded that emotion powers don't work quite right on Rachel.
Yeah. It's like, it can confirm that when my puppy has anxiety, he doesn't act like a human with anxiety. It's definitely a different thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, hey, Scott, is Rain's emotion power like directional, or is he just dosing everybody in the vicinity when he does this?
That's a good question, and I'm not sure I know the answer. I don't think it is like an aura type power, because like there's a later beat in the chapter where Victoria kind of looks at Colt's power and notes that like she's flying and she has like an aura to her and says that's really similar to me. And like this is part of the whole kind of confusion of, is she a new cluster? Is she a Trump? Like the thing that that she's wondering. It is definitely like a different kind of thing, because it clearly has longer range than Victoria's. I think it's probably directional. It seems like it is.
It seems like by now we would have heard about it if it wasn't, right? Because he was closer to Perry and Foyle, Candy, and Chastity than he was to Victoria for that whole fight, and nobody said anything about being miserable to his power. So
especially since we learned that Victoria's feeling of all these powers is a slower version of what everyone else is. So
right, true, yeah.
If he was causing massive doubt to the people standing around him throughout that whole fight, that'd be miserable.
That seems like a pretty safe conclusion.
Yeah.
So anyway, I like this fight with Nailbiter, because Nailbiter seems to be one of those capes where she's too strong and lethal to really fit in well with the cops and robbers milieu. And mostly the heroes have reacted to her presence by running away. But this time, Rachel's dogs were enough of a threat to just kind of keep, like basically just keeping the dogs at bay is hard enough that Nailbiter's kind of pinned in place, which gives Victoria an opportunity to strike at her.
Yeah. It's a really good point that I hadn't really thought about previously. And I think it's a beat that we've seen a few times, these kind of powers that in the olden days wouldn't fit in. And I wonder if it's fair to say that these powers are kind of flourishing now under this new world order that we're in. These powers that didn't fit into the old games are suddenly becoming so much more useful and more devastating.
Yeah, I think it makes sense that we're seeing Rachel here and we're seeing her, use her giant van-sized dogs, because that was kind of always an issue with Rachel, is like the Undersiders like put her out in the boonies because they were like, we can't really have you using that on people.
Yeah.
And now she's like, all right, attack, attack. Yeah. So, and then here we have Victoria crosses another line similar to handing Foyle the gun in the last chapter, where she uses the wretch in close proximity to Nailbiter, aware that while Nailbiter is durable, she's not indestructible. And before she does this, she even gives the warrior monk time to protest.
Yeah, I love that. I love that she gives the warrior monk 3 seconds. It's like 3 seconds for one part of her to convince the other part of her not to do this. And if that part tried to do it, it was overruled. I think she describes it as like the longest 3 seconds in her life or something, because, yeah, she does it. And we're going to talk about the implications of this in a bit, but I want to get through the actual meat of the fight first.
Sure. So practically speaking, I think here she's able to like explore using her power in a new way. So basically, she can let the wretch grab onto Nailbiter, and then she can walk around inside the bubble of her fully wretched out force field and then push on the inner surface of the force field, and the force field responds by providing no resistance to her and just making her movement super strong. So this is a cool new wrinkle in her power that we're learning pretty late in the story, and it's also, fun to basically just good to know, right?
Yeah, it's very new, and this idea of touching the wretch, making physical contact with this thing, it's a sensation that we've never seen described in the story before, and I just love if you track her relationship with the wretch throughout the story so far. We've gone from her never using it to hiding it from everyone and trying to use it very strategically to kind of trying to work with it more, and now she's touching it. And I love, like, the text knows that this is a big moment because you can tell how it describes it. A tense membrane, hard energy, my 2 years of waking nightmare. It slid under my hand a length of stomach, back, or thigh that was in the process of trying to get into place to do something. I could feel the curvature of it, my hand pressing against the inside of that nightmare-shaped shell. I love the text there. It's so delicious. Like, it accurately reflects the importance and the horror that she must be feeling in this moment, but ultimately the necessity of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think I even kind of consciously had the real, like, the thought she hasn't touched the wretch until you said it.
Yeah,
and yeah, a lot of kind of big strides, not necessarily all in positive directions, but a lot of stuff happening in these chapters in terms of Victoria's kind of journey of, changing and coming to grips with things.
Yeah.
So after a bit of tussling, Victoria manages to land a kick to Nailbiter's wrist, which breaks it.
Yeah, I want to spend some time on this because I love the way the text describes this too, which is I felt the impact through my body, saw her entire body twist and arc in reaction, 20-foot lengths of fingers sweeping through the air with the whistling whooshing sounds that normally came with the swing of blades. I think that the way this is described kind of accentuates like how the brutality seems like too harsh of a word, but like she breaks her wrist and like the reaction is immediate and swift and blades whistling through the air. It's rough. I mean, it's like she goes into, she's surrounded by Nailbiter again. Like she's in like a Nailbiter cage. She goes into it and chooses once again to use the wretch in close quarters combat, and breaks someone's wrist. And, we were talking about this in the Discord. And I was like trying to talk about how I loved how like brutal it was. And I used the phrase, excessive force. And I immediately retracted that because it wasn't quite what I meant when I said it. What I actually meant to say was like, this is an example of like elevated force. This is a level of violence from Victoria that is above the norm for her. and we've seen her do this in the past, right? Like Valefor's jaw is the jaw that like jumps right out of the mouth when you think of her doing this in the past.
Uh-huh.
And so it got me kind of going down this rabbit hole of thinking about the differences between these two things. And I think that's something worth talking about here, because we do this thing, I think, where we tend to look at, especially when we're looking at characters that we really like we do with Victoria, we look at the amount of force used and we decide, is the amount of force here appropriate? And if yes, okay, we're good. We did it, right? Mm-hmm. And that's not wrong, because I think like we look at the situation. She just broke Nailbiter's arm. Cradle is chopping people up. They're working with them. They're trying to stop these people to get to help their friends. They're also working with someone who's threatening to do something to time bubbles and end the entire world. Breaking someone's wrist in this situation, being that is completely fine, right? Like, in my opinion, like from a moral standpoint, from a getting the job done type of standpoint, this person's in your way, you got to do it. Mm-hmm. But it is an elevation, like choosing to use the wretch in this moment, choosing to risk using the wretch in that close quarters combat is an elevation of what Victoria does. And that's important.
Yeah.
And just like with the gun and the crossbow, just saying it's justified, I think, does a disservice to what the story is trying to do with the characters. Because the fact that she is forced to and or willing to elevate her level of force in situations matters to the journey of our character.
Yeah.
And I just like, I think that's something we talked about. I think that's something we talked about a lot in Worm without like putting those specific words to it, right? Like, I think there's a tendency, and I do it too, when you're looking at someone's actions, to just say, okay, were their actions justified? Yes, no, check the yes box. Okay, moving on. But I think we should look at it more than that, because like there is more to someone's choices than just will a third party observer agree that it was the justified choice to make in the situation. It says something about our characters. It says something about what the story's doing. It is exploring that in a very specific way. And I think that's worth talking about. And I think we need to put a term to it. And that's kind of why I like the idea of not excessive force, but definitely elevated force.
Yeah, absolutely right. Because like a major aspect of Victoria's character is that she bends over backwards to do things in a way where she gets to feel like a hero about it.
Right.
She absolutely bends over backwards to avoid injuring people if she can. Like, she literally will like construct her whole plan of attack such that she doesn't have to break anybody's limbs or risk killing anyone.
Yeah, there's a moment later in this chapter where Disjoint is falling and she gets herself in a position to catch him in case he falls too hard.
Yeah.
And then she's not like trying to hit him. She's not trying to hurt him. She's just there in that moment to make sure he doesn't fall too hard. And then once she realizes he's not going to fall too hard, she's like, okay, fuck it, bye. So yeah, this is different than that. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, right. And yeah, I mean, I think the Taylor comparison is warranted here, because with her, it really was always kind of is this justified? Like, she wasn't
right.
She wasn't, if she was going for optics, she was going for the optics of how do I make my team look really terrifying and remorseless, whereas Victoria's doing the opposite. Right.
Yeah. So, okay, that was what I wanted to talk about. So we can continue with the story again. Sorry.
Cool. No, I like talking about that. I think it's very important to what the story's doing. So Colt tackles Victoria and stabs her with her death blades, but they turn out not to be death blades. They're just thing breaky blades. Saved by the Manton effect again, Vicky.
Haha, Colt, your blades are shittier than Rain's blades. Sucks for you.
It seems like it's the only part of her power that's not strictly better than actually, we don't know if she has any tinkering yet, but
yeah, presumably, yeah. I mean, that's the thing we haven't talked about yet, is that the breaker twist is new to the cluster. And we can't really say anything about it yet because we just don't know yet. We don't know the details of any of it yet, but it is a different twist.
It's only now that she even kind of starts thinking about it, right? As she flies off, they kind of pair off. Victoria trying to puzzle out the power as they duel. So Victoria first kind of experimentally lobs a chunk of concrete at Nailbiter, which forces Colt to reveal her lack of super strength when she tries to stop it.
Yeah.
Which is kind of funny because, like, I don't even know if Colt knew that would happen. Her whole approach basically is to analyze and find drawbacks in Colt's breaker form. And the text spends quite an enjoyable bit of time on Victoria's analysis here.
Yeah. It's like there's not a lot of specific moments that I want to get into here because you're right, this does go on for a long time. It's great, but there's not really anything to dive into here. It's her doing super geeky cape analysis. I think it's great. I think it connects back to what we were talking about in the first chapter this week of her retreating into her refuge of cape geekery to make it through the difficulties that are in front of her. And like she's got all these, we know she has all these anxieties. We know she has all this doubt because they're literally being thrust at her. And she's using this geekery. I don't think it's a coincidence that in this fight where both anxiety and doubt are being thrown at her from different sides is the one where we see her at her most cape geeky. I don't think that's a coincidence.
Yeah, right. It's a coping mechanism, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, as part of all this, she tries to talk to Colt, and Colt reveals that she can't talk in this form. So Victoria gets to say her piece unanswered. Victoria guesses that at least in this form, the breaker might be in a whimsical frame of mind, and that a good counter might be to say something to bring her down to earth. So she describes how the bad guys are going to die. How the bad guys are going to hurt and kill good people, and that this mysterious breaker will be responsible for it. And when she doesn't seem to get the response she wants, she thinks, this never works. Talking to people about the harm being done, the stakes.
It's probably my favorite bit of this chapter, actually. I really like hundreds of words of analysis, right? Like she's been going through and like trial and error with this breaker stuff, trying different strategies, different tactics, and none of them are working. And then finally she's like, I'm going to talk to her. And even as she's doing it, she's like, oh, this isn't going to work.
Yeah.
But it does kind of, right? That's the cool thing. Like it's debatable how much it works, but it has an effect.
At the very least, it makes her hesitate.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was only in the last episode, maybe, where she tried to talk to the mercenaries, and they were like, look, I got a family. Yeah. She's like, God damn it.
But I think that's it. It is so, I love that it is Victoria that, like, at the end of the day, I go through my Rolodex of cape figures and I decide, let's just talk it out, man. Let's just talk it out. Like, let's just, come on. I don't want to hurt you. Maybe it's because I don't think I can win in this. Like, I can't win this fight fast enough. But like, let's just talk it out has been a Victoria drum that she's beat so many times throughout the story, and I think it's wonderful.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like, so she does get a reaction, right? And it's actually that reaction that leads her to guess that it's Colt.
Yeah, I guess we can finally say, like, we've said it like 6 times already. I don't know why we pretend these things, but
it's fun.
I guess now is a good time to talk about the fact that Colt's version of the emotional power is weaponized anxiety is perfect.
Yeah,
because that's Colt. Like, that's exactly who Colt is.
Yeah. And I mean, that was what she was experiencing in that moment. Not only was that whole chapter indecision and too many things going on, but the moment of her trigger was like being pushed by imp into floor. Yeah. Like, just like everything on all sides is bad and there are no good decisions, and now that's your power.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. So she tries to offer Colt an out from the villain team, or, you know, and then when that doesn't seem like it's going to be working, it at least offers to let her slip, or says like, hey, let me slip by so I can help my friends just for 5 seconds, do nothing.
Yeah, for 5 seconds, just freeze.
Right? Yeah, well, I love it.
Yep, it's so great.
I mean, I think this was the right call, because it does stall her. It works, right? And it gives. I don't know if it's fair to say that it gives her the time she needs, but I mean, they do win this fight, so.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I don't know if Victoria did this consciously, but she does tap into, you know, Colt's natural state is kind of to freeze in these moments, to not have to make a decision. people have constantly been making the decisions for her or forcing her into different decisions, and she kind of plays to her natural inclination to just freeze.
Mm-hmm. Right, yeah, just the trick for beating her is just offer her more options and then act while she's thinking about them. And we've said before, like, my current theory is that there is no emotion bleed in Rain's cluster. It's just that every member of the cluster is constantly experiencing a low-grade version of their own power. And if that's the case, then Colt is constantly experiencing a low-grade version of this crippling anxiety.
Yeah, I like that.
And
sure.
and indecision. So yeah, that would be the approach. So Victoria takes her opening and she dives down, striking kitchen sink across the collarbone and cracking it. That's 2 bones broken in one fight.
Elevated force, motherfuckers.
Which is, I think, the time to point out that, like, she broke Valefor's jaw. She broke a dude's arm when they were shooting at her friends. But now she's broken 2 bones in the same fight from 2 different people. So that is a strict elevation in force.
Can't wait till we get that hat trick of broken bone.
Yep. Shortly after, as she tries to deal with Hookline, she's hit by Lovelost's rage scream. So we finally get to see what that's like from the inside. And it makes her real aggro. She wants to hurt people.
Oh, and just like every other emotional power we're talking about here, this anger, this comes from her. This is not new. It's just elevated to the surface. So when she says things like, I felt like flying through it and winning regardless was a really fucking good idea because fuck that 2-bit villain. Fuck everyone responsible here. That is Victoria. That is quintessentially a Victoria. Fuck that 2-bit villain is a Victoria original. It's just being artificially brought to the surface by this power. All she has to do left is like insult his costume and they'll be like, yeah.
Right. Yeah. She doesn't turn into a wild animal and start thrashing her own teammates. Right. It's just her own nature, the part of her that is wrath, with the filters taken off. Yeah.
And it's just what you were talking about. It's like this fact that she could go into any one of these fights and probably win if she was willing to. Mm-hmm. And she recognizes that right here. I felt like flying right through it and winning regardless. Mm-hmm. She knows she's capable of doing that in most situations. Not all situations, but most situations. And it is because Victoria is unwilling to do that things get so hard for her. But that is who she is. Yeah.
Yep. All right. So Rain hits Hookline with one of his silver blades, and then Foil knocks him down, and the blade causes the clothing and flesh at his shoulder and chest to part, and blood goes everywhere. Hey, Scott.
Huh?
Hey, Scott.
What is it, Matt?
Just that the silver blade split both the clothing and the flesh underneath.
Yeah, this is something. So we said that back in the Lord of Lost fight, right? That she got a blade on her leg, and some people responded to us that were like, well, no, it would have just split her costume. Her leg would have been fine. And I was like, I mean, the story technically did say that at the beginning, so that makes sense. But I conceded the point to people, but also still remained confused because like the way the story framed the scene was not that it would have just done nothing, right? So I was like, well, maybe she didn't know, and it didn't really make sense. But this is basically the story, circling around and confirming to us that that's not the way Rain's blades work anymore. And then we have to remember the fact that the last time we definitively said his blades only go through one material at a time was pre-Snag's death. So the assumption here then is that as part of his power-up that happened after the death of Snag, his blade is able to go through cloth, through multiple layers now.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of Snag's death, I thought that he hit him in the chest, and he was wearing, presumably both Snag and Hookline are wearing shirts, and it still killed Snag, and it badly injured Hookline here. So I think it's safe to assume it would have been bad for Victoria.
Yeah, I can't remember if like he was throwing so many blades that like part of his clothing was already ripped off or anything. But yeah, the point is that Rain's power now goes through clothes. So
yeah,
it certainly makes me feel better about that scene, right? Because it just really felt that way to me. It really felt like we were saying that if she kicks him, that leg's coming off.
Yeah.
So
right.
I was very confused when I was like, oh, everyone's right. Like they're technically right. So it was great that the book came back and kind of filled this in for us.
Yeah. And the text itself says costume and flesh cut. Right. Like that, like I don't know what else to say about that.
It is being very explicit. Like like not only like this is actually like a poster child of how to like correct someone's understanding when you're writing a book live, because the way this is framed is costume and flesh cut, which makes that very clear. And then it specifically cuts back to the Lord of Lost fight, right? Mm-hmm. Like I'd had the same lines drawn on me just an hour ago when fighting Lord of Lost. The text is explicitly referencing back to that moment and saying, this is what would have happened in that moment. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how more explicit it can be than that.
Yes, I think you're right.
Yeah. All right. So near the end of the fight where Victoria is deciding if she wants to go fight Colt with Foyle, there is this beat where she's afraid to leave Rain alone, Matt. She doesn't want to leave Rain to tackle Love Lost. And she says publicly it's because I don't think Chastity can beat her, which gets a nice fuck you from Chastity. But what she's thinking is the more interesting thing to me, because she's thinking, I'm not sure you won't put yourself in a situation where you're forced to kill her. I only imagine that because I'm trapped in my own hell of other people. And even though it's as good as it's going to get, it still eats at me. She's in another world, and there's little to no chance she shows up in my life again until I reach out. But it eats at me. I can sympathize if you want her dead. And this is one of those like Rain-related epiphanies that went off in my head of like, because I think we have been circling around this for the last few episodes, but I don't think we've explicitly stated it in quite this way. We're talking about why Victoria has such a complex and complicated and difficult relationship with Rain at times. And we said like her ideas of forgiveness, her ideas of redemption and how those things conflict. And that's all very true. But here we get a window into it. Maybe it's because she sees herself in him and she's terrified of what she's going to be capable of and therefore terrified of what he might be capable of. Yeah.
Yeah. I like that. That didn't really occur to me at all, actually. But yeah, I mean, I think that what's interesting is that my read on Rain, admittedly, it's been a while since I read his interludes, but like, I don't think he really like wants her dead in the same way. Like he kind of went out of his way to try not to kill any of the cluster and gave Snag every opportunity to not kill himself. And
yeah, I don't think this is a correct read.
Yeah,
I agree.
I just think that Victoria's in a very different place than Rain is, and I mean, she literally almost murdered Amy in the last, whenever that was.
But for chance, almost.
Right.
It's so fascinating. Like, I agree with you. I think she's wrong. I don't think Rain would put himself in a situation where he would be forced to kill her. Like choose to be in a situation where that is the only choice. I don't think Rain would do that.
Yeah,
I could be wrong. We'll see.
Now he might end up doing it, but I don't think it'll be because he like maneuvered himself into that situation.
Yeah, I agree.
It'll be because his hand was forced.
But she thinks on some level, I might do that.
Yeah.
I might do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think this says almost more about her than it says about him. And I mean, it's great. It's great because
it makes her quick to get frustrated, her barbed behavior around him make a little more sense to me.
Yeah. And this is far from the first time that she's thought to herself privately, like, man, it would be really convenient if she was dead. If someone would just kill her, then I wouldn't have to worry about this anymore.
I do like the part that there's little to no chance she shows up in my life again until I reach out, not if I reach out. I like the until there jumped out at me, and I was like, Victoria.
I like that. Good catch, that. Excellent. So Victoria ends up throwing Foyle her gun again, essentially reaffirming her decision to use guns in this fight. And then Foyle shoots to intentionally graze her own fingers to impart the bullet with sting power, pinning Colt to the ground with it through the foot. Man, everybody's getting tore up in this fight.
Yeah, that's pretty rough. Just got to shoot my hand.
Yep.
And it's awesome though. I like it. But I do think you're right that there's a lot of people getting hurt in this fight. And that's because this fight is a little bit more elevated as far as force goes. People are holding back a little less, and people are getting hurt more. Like, this is like, we got people damaged all over the place, and I can't help but wonder if this is going to continue along this path.
Yeah.
Until like instead of all the capes leave the fight injured, all the capes leave the fight with half of them dead.
Right.
Like, you know, like you just see that on the horizon, and I don't know if it's going to go there. I don't know if it's going to get there, but I can see it, and it's like, oh God.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm going through this. Love Lost, I think, is not injured. Everybody else, maybe Rain is not injured.
Yeah, I think Rain gets out okay.
I'm not sure if Foil is injured, but like, yeah, like almost everybody has some kind of injury, ranging from having their chest split open to having like a bad enough scrape on her foot that she can't walk. Yeah. It's a broken wrist, broken collarbone. Yeah, serious injuries, right? Like hospital injuries.
Yeah.
Not first aid injuries. All right. Yeah. So team's taken down everybody except Love Lost. But once again, Love doesn't seem to be too perturbed about it.
Yeah.
So she offers to trade some of Victoria's allies back if they'll let her group go.
Yeah, I love the recurring beats of Love Lost's confidence, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we had that one back, God, was it over an arc ago? I can't even remember when that was, but we had that one beat where she just like was creepily confident, and then at the end of this huge, massive fight where her entire team got their asses kicked, like she's the only one there. There's that steely confidence still, and it's like it's easy to say, well, she's confident because their friends are captured and she knows that she has bargaining chips and she knows that they're going to deal with her. And I do think that is part of it for sure. But there's other stuff going on here because like we have this moment where they're like, you don't want Rain? You like, isn't this like from what we understand of Love Lost is that the entire thing driving her is killing these two people, one of which we don't know who he is, but two people. And then she's going to go away. Then she'll be done. That's her whole mission, her whole point. And they're like, you don't want Rain? Like she doesn't even try to bargain for Rain in this whole thing, right? And her response to that is, you'll turn yourself into our care another time. And it's just, that's so like creepy. And like, I just like, it's this confidence that like, we're going to get you. Like I don't need you here. And it makes me wonder, like, you know, we have Colt being a new member of the Shard. We know that they've tried to get people into the Dream Room before. Like the level of confidence makes me think we're going to get you because we know where you'll be every night and we're going to get you there.
Yeah, it's just so ominous because
Right.
it's like, as bad as everything is right now, I'm just going to walk away from this because whatever we have planned coming up, you're not even going to be able to escape from. I'm totally confident. Right. And that's very like, oh Christ. Yeah. So
especially since we know this is like her driving goal, like this is her thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. That somehow makes it more creepy, right? Like he's right in front of her. She doesn't even seem like she's holding herself back from attacking him because she's just so, like you said, so confident that it's just like, it's a matter of time, which again, like it makes you really wonder and puts you into the space of like, what's going on? Cause like her nature is rage.
Right.
And the fact that she's being patient about it implies like, not only is she going to get him and she's confident about it, but she's confident that it's going to satisfy her horrible rage.
Yeah.
It's just, I don't know. It all just adds up to be.
Yeah. And like one thing we did, like you could make the assumption that like, okay, they've got this plan. She knows she's going to get him and she's confident in that. But still, like when you're engaged in a cape battle, wouldn't you like position yourself to like go for him? Like we're fighting, these two teams are fighting. There's the guy I want dead. I'm going to maneuver myself in this battle to try to take him out. Right. And that really doesn't happen in this fight. Like she doesn't do that. Yeah. And I think that once again is so reflective on the fact that she has no qualms, no doubts, no anything about the fact that she's going to get what she wants.
Yeah, right. Yeah, she like joins the fight late, and all she really does is do the rage scream, and then she's like, "Oh, I guess we lose." It's almost like, I mean, I don't want to say that they lost on purpose because
That diminishes our team's badass victory.
It does. And it's, and also I don't feel like she would have put her team in a position where they were going to get horribly injured. Yeah. Like on purpose. But
I think it's less she lost on purpose and more winning or losing in this moment did not matter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, so the negotiation with Love Lost seems almost stalled with Victoria and the others not fully on board with just letting Love Lost group go. So Love Lost stops talking and starts just piping in the audio feed of Victoria's friends screaming.
Yeah, it's very effective negotiation tactic there, Matt.
Yep.
The reaction to it, though, by everyone. For an instant, I forgot how to breathe. My heart forgot how to beat. I wouldn't have been sure I knew how to stand if I couldn't fly to keep myself up. Candy reacted. I saw hands at her mouth. Chastity visibly flinched. Rain, he looked angry and harrowed at the same time. That is wonderful. My heart forgot how to beat is just this line that like I don't know why it just works. It just works so well to convey what's going on here because like obviously that can't happen, but that's how extreme it was.
Yeah.
My heart forgot. I love that. I love that so much.
Yeah, I love that because you know exactly what that means, even though that isn't a thing, right? Like that's that's great writing.
And seeing the heartbroken, like the heartbroken who are so nasty to each other at times, are so like casually terrible to each other, react visibly to the scream as well.
Yeah, I mean that's the kind of the great thing that's been built up is that they're so imperturbable and act like horrible things are fun and funny and nothing matters.
Yeah,
but yet they stay together as a group, and they have this like these elaborate games where it's like you can do whatever you want as long as you don't hurt Chicken Little and whatever, and it's all to some degree shown to be not fake, but a layer on top of something else when you see how they react when they realize that the people they care about are actually hurt.
Yeah. I love it.
Yeah. So I just love this bit where Victoria starts to kind of crack and says, "You brought her into this?" I asked, my voice choked as I pointed down at Colt. "I brought myself into this," Colt said. I could read her expression now. I could see a look of regret pass over her face. I didn't care in the slightest either, because regret wasn't worth a speck of shit if it didn't change anything.
So that's a lot.
Yeah.
Here's the thing with that. I agree that regret without change is pointless. Like if you regret doing something but continue to do it, then screw you, right?
Yeah.
However, I think it's a little more complicated than that. And I'm not going to sit here and defend Colt because I think she's generally an idiot who makes bad choices. But like there's a lot of complex stuff going on with her relationship with her family, with her relationship with Love Lost. It also like this could have been like the first moment in her life that she actually like processed regret. And it's like, you haven't had time to see like what's she just going to do? Just walk with you now? Like, it's just, I don't know. Like, I don't want to defend her because I do think she just makes terrible choices. But I think while true, this is a little too harsh to me.
I mean, I think when you're young, it's you got to have some life experience to make enough bad decisions that they actually start catching up with you. And I think she may be just now getting to the point where there's kind of no going back, right? Like that was actually her interlude was, this is your last chance to go back, and going back would suck. You'd get yelled at probably. People would be mad. I personally think her family probably would have taken her back, but maybe not. Maybe they were terrible people. Yeah. But the point is that ship has sailed. You are in this now, and only now is she able to actually say, okay, I've made a decision. I've cut off one avenue of possibility, and now I am capable of regret for the first time.
Yeah, so, which it makes me feel bad for her a little bit.
Well, it makes me feel bad for her too, right? I mean, like she wasn't making that decision like from a place of from the kind of mental place where you should be making decisions like that.
Right. And also, I mean, if she is part of this cluster now, then part of that was she was manipulated, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, like if they orchestrated this to get her part of the cluster as part of some long-term cluster fuckery game that they're playing, then yeah, she was totally like weirdly coerced into this in a different kind of way. Yeah. I mean, like, look, I completely agree with the sentiment that like just showing regret on its own is pretty useless in the grand scheme of things, but I can't help but feel bad for her in this moment where she's like, oh yeah, I've crossed the line and now I'm fucked, and bummer.
I mean, I can empathize with both her feelings and with Victoria's perspective of fuck you.
Right.
Stop making shitty decisions and maybe I'll have some pity for you.
Yeah. Your regret does nothing for me right now.
Yeah.
It doesn't help me. It doesn't get me out of the situation. It doesn't get any of my friends out of the situation. You idiot.
Yeah.
I totally get that. It makes total sense.
Right. So, yep, they let the team go, and the team the good guys immediately head for the university with Victoria flying ahead of them, and she reaches the building where the horrible thing happened, and she's greeted by the smell of blood and bodily fluids.
Ugh.
She finds Tristan first, bisected, and I mean, like, Wildbow just sets up this whole thing to be perfectly maximally gutting.
Awful.
No pun intended. Tristan isn't in stasis because when they heard Victoria come, they swapped out so that their enemies wouldn't know that Byron was still ambulatory.
Which is just awful.
Yeah.
Like,
Right. And so Tristan's intentionally suffering horribly for Byron and the team. So Scott, I noticed in our script here that you didn't write a lot of comments, and that's usually what I noticed, that you and I both wrote the minimal amount of stuff here because neither of us wanted to mentally grapple with what was being described in these scenes.
Yeah. It is maximally terrible.
Yeah. So apparently Byron has been collecting body parts into gym bags, and Darlene is just over there having a complete mental breakdown, and Chicken Little can't hear and needs his mask on to hold things in place.
Ugh.
And that's just, I mean, that's like, that's so horrible. And that's it's so well done because you're like, what did they do to him? No, don't show me. I don't want to know. But what did they do? But I don't want to know. Right? Isn't that perfectly horrible?
Yep.
Tattletale's body is there, sans head. And apparently they've intentionally severed some parts of Lookout and Swansong, who were already captives. So they just took their captives and they just hacked off some pieces, I guess.
Yep.
For some reason, that made me madder than any of the other things, I guess, because they were already captives. And it's just like, you're just you die now. You will die now. I will kill you.
So they returned some of their people. And, you know, the fascinating thing, I want to explain how my brain works a little bit here. Because... So we end the Darlene chapter and Tattletale gets chopped into 4, and then Cradle turns on Darlene, right? And then we cut. And like logically, everything that happens after that lines up to this scene, right? Like that they just, meticulously did terrible things to all these people and left them there to suffer, and then took pieces of them away to maximize that suffering. However, my brain was like, surely that's not going to happen. Surely the entire team, except for the people that the guys that we've been with for the past few chapters, are not going to be chopped into pieces and unable, like that. There's no way that can happen, even though it's the most logical thing to logical conclusion to reach here. Of course, like, what was Darlene going to beat them like by herself? And then we're going to cut back and it's like, oh no, Darlene won. It's like, no, that's not going to happen. She's going to lose. She's going to fucking choppy uppy whip.
Yeah. I don't know what it is about my brain that I never quite learn, where I'm always like, but wouldn't it be interesting if Victoria showed up and somehow the rest of the team had pulled it out and had fought their way clear.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, you're just flinching away from accepting
right.
that the inevitable thing is going to happen, which is the worst thing, because you don't want to think about it.
Right. I think that the part that was hardest for me was Darlene. And I think it's specifically because of how it contrasts with how we saw her with Operator Red. We see her as this like stunningly cruel and effective killer. where she just is able to completely overpower this guy and just brutally kill him.
Yeah.
And then like we contrast this with this little girl who's having this breakdown. Like it's just so like the contrast is so evident that it's just like it just like emotionally wrecks you because you're just like, it's not what you had expected. Like you just don't know what to do with it. And it, like, you go right from Darlene, like losing her shit to suddenly Chicken Little. Like the phrase, don't take off his mask. He needs it to hold everything in place is probably one of the most brutally amazing sentences written in the story so far, because you don't need to say anything else. Like, and I wonder if there would be some writers who would have a temptation to show that, right? Like there's some, like, I love horror and I love gruesome horror at times, but sometimes the best thing to do in a horrible situation is to leave a little bit to the imagination. Some horror directors would be tempted in the scene to pull that mask off and show us what it looks like. But right. just that phrase, just that line is perfect enough to, it's fucking terrible.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're probably going to find out what it was eventually, but
sure.
In this particular scene, this is by far the most awful thing to do to us.
Yep.
Because it just makes you imagine how, like, not only what could it, but just like my brain involuntarily rendered like 2 or 3 different possible horrible things that could be under that mask. So
yeah. And I mean, now, so we're here at the end of this chapter, with our heroes in probably one of the worst situations they've been in this book. And I think that's saying something.
Yeah.
And we were talking last week, and I think we forgot to put this. This is what I was thinking last week when I thought it was just Tattletale and Tristan that were chopped in half, not like freaking 90% of the team or whatever it is. But there is a certain person that would be really good at putting these people back together again.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think we even mentioned that just after it had only happened to the Navigators.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, I mean, we're racking up a lot of motivation to go talk to that certain person.
Yeah, we sure are. We sure are. And she's called the Red Queen, Matt. And, I mean, Alice Through the Looking Glass. We've been returning to this Alice Through the Looking Glass story a few times throughout this book so far, because we have to say that we got the Red Queen, and then we have Dinah as a character that is a cat. It's just a cat somewhere. Humpty Dumpty was in Alice Through the Looking Glass, and he fell all apart, and nobody could put him back together again. Mm-hmm. So,
but the Red Queen never tried.
That's true.
We also got March Hare, Time.
Yeah, that's true. That March, yeah. So I mean, it's great. It seems like a very obvious place to go with it, which means it might not be the place we're going. But I hated that. I loved how this chapter ended.
Right. What's funny is I was thinking about it, and we're segueing into the discussion question anyway. So I'll just mention, like, this chapter to me did not qualify as horror awesome. This is just horrible.
Yeah, this is just horrible.
Because there's not that counterpoint of like the fist bump while the horrific thing is happening. You're just like, oh God, purely. Mm-hmm. So that being said, unless you have any more comments, let's move on to Community Spotlight.
Yeah, we're running super late, so let's somehow we're at 2 hours without even getting into the Community Spotlight. Right. So let's go.
Well, okay. So the question again was, what is the most horror awesome moment in Parahumans? And Sarah Penguin says Regent's Interlude. Well, she got the right answer on the first go. So I guess
I noticed you put this one first.
Yeah, I mean, we don't even need to move on. Sarah Penguin says, we're given enough context to know that Regent has used his power in disturbing ways in the past, and Regent repeatedly pushes up against those bounds of going too far in this interlude. The text focuses on Sophia's awareness of and reaction to the slow, methodical dismantling of her life. And you're kind of rooting for Alec the whole time, which is the awesome part, because Sophia spends so much of Worm getting away with everything, and here she's finally getting what she deserves.
Yeah, I like that a lot, because that is definitely the conflicting emotions I had. On the one hand, fuck Shadowstalker so much. On the other hand, everything that's happening here is horrible.
Right.
Yeah. All right, we have both Regvlas and Scandiaca blessing. Scandiaca. See, they even spelled it out for me phonetically, and I still said it wrong. But they both mentioned Taylor killing Tag and Alexandria as awesome, revenging the apparent death of a beloved teammate right in front of her dad while delivering her badass line, repeating back Alexandria's early threat. Yeah, that was a really, really awesome moment. I agree, and it was also really, really horrible.
Yep. Anti-Chris just simply quotes, "Finally, everyone was working together."
I think that's good. I think that's a perfect definition of it, actually.
Yep.
All right, next we have a foursome. We got some...
Yeah, these are just all people who picked the same moment.
Yeah. FIP Industries, Jazriel, Sibs, Walg, and Roundest Frog all elaborate on Anti-Chris's previous moment. Taylor and talk about Taylor's psychic dismantling during Spec. Taylor taking over the multiverse is both satisfying and awful. It's a slow build as the costs continue to mount, and despite the growing hope that she might actually win, your confidence that there will be anything left of her by the end steadily diminishes. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people, I think, just said Taylor is horror awesome. Right. And I think that's not false.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff near the latter part of the story in particular. Like here, Wanson says the part during Gold Morning when Taylor uses her apocalyptic swarm to literally devour the Young Bond defenders, and thinking to herself, fuck them for not cooperating. Fuck it all. I shouldn't have to go this far.
I shouldn't have to go this far. Yeah, it's such a quintessential Taylor line. I love it so much.
I know. What's funny is that okay.
Fuck you for making me kill you.
Right. Which is like the third time that's happened in the story.
EXE JPEG Windows Media Viewer says when Golem takes down Jack Slash while being partially eviscerated and freshly stitched together by Parian, and then they trap Jack in an effectively eternal hell. Yeah, that's really great too. I think Worm is just horror awesome. I think it's what I'm noticing. It's just like I'm thinking of a moment and I can't not think of it as being horror awesome. So yeah, that's a great one too. I still love the Golem fight. Like Golem's arc in Worm is one of my favorite things, and the culmination of that in his Jack Slash fight was just wonderful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Speaking of Jack Slash, Data Snake 69 discusses Lisa's conversation with Jack Slash, specifically the part where he slices her face open and she's bleeding badly enough that we're not sure if she'll survive. And instead of panicking, she chooses to use this time to communicate with pen and paper, and still has the poise to use the information she gleaned from Jack's reactions to convince him to treat the Nine's visit to Brockton Bay as a game, which they eventually end up winning. Yeah, Lisa's badass.
Yeah, she's geez, I hope Headless Lisa can do something.
Yeah, well,
we're gonna need it, team.
Lisa has a lot of record scratch. You're probably wondering how I got into this situation. Moments in
that's true
in the whole saga.
That is true. Toast Ghost 18, I love that name, mentions what we talked about earlier, that Taylor is Horror-Awesome personified. This post is basically a greatest hits of Taylor's improbable victories, focusing on how she not only gets out of tight situations, but leverages the inherently horrifying nature of her power to do so. They focus particularly on her escape from the burning building surrounded by Coil's mercenaries. Yeah, I loved that moment. That was so amazing.
Yeah, I kind of forgot how awesome it was until reading their post. And just reminded me of all the little subtle things she does.
Coil's "don't use grenades" moment is so good.
Yeah. I forgot about that. Lone Wolf 854 talks about Bonesaw, specifically the scene at the merchant's party where she makes a self-propagating exploding virus that explodes people who are hit by the giblets of the previous wave of exploding people. And the fact that Bonesaw specifically makes it explicitly clear that she's artificially limited the degree of the spread of the virus to give the Nine their sport. So it's like, not only is this a horrifying thing to do, but she held herself back.
Yeah.
Could have just kept going.
But also, it's the merchants, so it's awesome.
Yes. True.
All right. Alternative Arrival says Sierra's perspective on Skitter's return to her base after she dealt with the Slaughterhouse 9. One of the few perspectives on Skitter from the outside, from someone who doesn't really know her, showing us not the conflicted teenager we know, but a terrifying, inhuman figure coated with writhing insects. Ooh, I like that. I like that a lot.
Yeah, that's a particularly good moment because it's you are experiencing the awe and the horror of who Taylor looks like from the outside.
Yeah.
Tisarwat talks about Earthbet. Earthbet is the world of Horasum. And they actually quote this bit where Trickster is thinking to himself, how had Jess put it? This world was sublime, a world that was awesome in the truer sense of the word, greater in so many respects. In a metaphorical sense, the peaks were higher, the valleys lower, works of art more artful, extremes more extreme. It wasn't a good thing. Make the mountains twice as tall and the chasms twice as deep, and things start crumbling. And then they also give a nod to Khepri's takedown of the woman in blue as a Horasum moment.
I like that. The whole planet.
Yeah.
So not just all of Taylor, but everything.
Yep.
It's perfect.
Yeah, I like that.
Kausubalu V2 says they basically point out that the Simurgh's priority was to make an Eidolon clone, which means she needs the world to last a while longer, which means she needs to kill Scion, an entity she can directly perceive. So she orchestrates Tattletale and Khepri's victory. The Simurgh saved the world.
Yeah, that's basically them, Kausubalu saying this is Horasum. The fact that the story was won by the Simurgh so she could make an Eidolon clone.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. Stan the Man Chan talks about when Rachel six bastard on Scion as being an awesome and horrible moment and I like that moment too because when that happens, there's actually a note of worry of like, uh-oh, is Bastard just a giant flesh monstrosity now? Like, I mean, he gets fixed, right? But
yeah. All right, next we have Skints, who says the moment surrounding King of Cups' second trigger. The heroes are fighting valiantly. The fight is rough, but people are being brave. Scion catches King of Cups and figures out who's important to them and crushes Queen of Swords' head until it crushes.
It's crushed.
Yeah. Causing him to second trigger and creating a trigger vision which completely destroys all hopes of the heroic presence by showing them the scope of Scion's being. And Scion caps it off by killing King of Cups too, just as his power manifests. Yeah, I like that answer a lot. And I totally forgot about that moment. And it's this wonderfully devastating, amazing moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's just cruel in an amazing way.
Yeah, this highlights that even our made up word Horasum has different shades to it because some of these are like, yeah, that was badass, but it was badass in a way that's dark. This is just fucking dark. And it happens to also kind of just be like so dark that you're just like, holy shit.
Yeah, it's fucking metal.
Right. Yeah. So the point is we need like more words, even.
Not enough. Some people weren't happy with our word.
Well, and they can make up more subcategories of this concept then.
There you go.
The Chubb 23 actually mentions 11.8 of Ward, Victoria fighting Lord of Lost under the influence of Rain's power. Rain makes you better, but only by pushing you to your worst. I love that. It's true because like it is totally an awesome fight. You're so like proud of her, but also it's like the darkest she gets in the whole story.
Yep. And to finish it off with AC, we have 9.11 of Ward. The way Lung just takes gruesome dismemberment and impalement is badass, even though you're not on his side. It's great. Interesting enough, mostly worm answers this time around. Mm-hmm. A couple Ward ones, but mostly worm.
Yeah,
I think that's fair.
I think Taylor does a lot of things that qualify.
Yep, lots of Taylor.
I mean, what's funny is we were specifically thinking of this because of like the nursery power and stuff like that, which was in Ward. But I see why people went to worm for that.
I do too.
So new discussion question for this week is tell us your favorite example of Victoria's leadership qualities.
I like this one. I think her leadership is. I think this is going to be a tough one to answer a little bit because it's complex. But I'm interested to see what people come up with.
Yeah, it's one of those ones where it's like, really, what do you think is good leadership qualities?
Yeah, it's a very revealing answer.
Yep,
you're revealing something about yourself how you answer this. And be nervous, everyone.
That's what we want. We want you to bare your souls. And that's all we got for you this week on We've Got Ward. You guys are all part of this show, so feel free to provide us with advice, questions, or thoughts on this week's reading.
You can reach out to us via email at gotwormpod@gmail.com or over on our Twitter account at gotwormpod. My personal Twitter is at ScottDaily85 and Matt's is at MoreDinamail.
Yeah, and if you're not already subscribed to We've Got Ward, we strongly recommend you do so and never miss an episode. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, Google Play, and pretty much anywhere else in the world you can listen to podcasts.
And as always, you can find this and all the other shows we do over at doofmedia.com. Once again, that is where you will find all episodes of Deep Impact, the newest show here under the Doof Network. I think they're about an arc and a half into the story, and they're doing about 2 episodes a week. So it is a perfect time to get into that. If you've never read Pact before, if you've been waiting for an excuse, now is the time. You can catch up to them really quick and then follow along with them as they read. I'm going to do exactly that here pretty soon. So you should too.
Yeah, I heartily endorse that. And if you like any of our shows, including Deep Impact, and you want to support them, consider donating to our Patreon account, patreon.com/doofmedia. You can donate $1 a month or whatever else you can afford. Supporting us on Patreon gives you tons of great bonuses like voting in our quarterly fan art and costume contests, Q&A sessions, access to live streams of our recording sessions, and our excellent Discord chat. And this week's special thanks to new Bidoofs, Sophie B. and Jordan S. at the $1 level, a voracious reader who has upgraded to $2.50 per month, and Abigail H, who's upgraded to the $5 level, and new Doof Troop member Benjamin Y at the $10 level. We appreciate all of you so much.
Yeah, guys, thank you so much, guys. It's amazing that we get to read new names for this every week. Like, it's so
yeah,
it's incredible. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And as always, of course, make sure you head over to Wildbow's Patreon, patreon.com/wildbow, and donate to him as well. This is his world. We're just playing in it.
That is absolutely right. And if you cannot afford to donate right now, that is absolutely okay. You can instead help us out by going over to Apple Podcasts and leaving us a rating and a review. This week's review comes from Tasarwat, who I think is a new patron as well. I think it was last week we read their name. Anyway, they give us 5 stars and say, tricked into becoming a podcast fan. I've tried listening to podcasts multiple times, but We've Got Ward is the only one that has kept my attention. When illness delayed an episode's release, I went back to the first episode of We've Got Worm, and that plunged me into a re-listen. Listening to this may trap you in a podcast loop. The analysis is thought-provoking and incisive. The hosts are hilarious. Hey, and they show genuine affection and friendship towards each other. Oh, good. We're good at acting.
Yeah, that's great job, Scott.
10 out of 10 would listen from scratch out of a need to get my fix again. Thank you so much to Sarwat. We really appreciate that review. And we appreciate all of you that take the time to go out there and give us a rating and a review. I say this every week, but I mean it every week. It really does help us. And we appreciate you all that take the time to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, that's it for this week. We'll be back next week with some more Arc 11 Blinding.
I think we're coming up near the end here, Matt. I think a couple more chapters, I'm guessing.
Yeah, feels like it.
Bye-bye.